Hello and welcome to My Book, a podcast about books and their authors with a South Asian twist. This podcast is produced by Cineink in London. I am Malvika Kaul from New Delhi. The partition of India into two countries, India and Pakistan, took place in 1947. In India, many of us are familiar with the breakup of Punjab province during partition. But another Indian province was also turned into two pieces. That was Bengal. What happened to the people of Bengal during this violent separation? History says Bengal was divided again and again, and its people uprooted and never allowed to settle down.
Displacement can bring in understanding, exposure. Like Manjira Majumdar's story, he is a son of a refugee, but he has chosen to stay in the United States. Maybe chosen or circumstances, when you go to study, you kind of stay back. And he creates his little home, within Phoenix, growing Rajnigandha. So that reminds him of home. So sometimes, we get displaced and we create a little home.
In this episode, I discuss No Return Address, Partition and the Stories of Displacement, a book about Bengal and Bengalis. The book is published by Vitasta Publishers in New Delhi. No Return Address was released in 2022, the 75th year of India's independence. It tells stories of displacement and alienation caused due to partition, war, and violence. To discuss this book, I have with me Manjira Majumdar, who has compiled and edited this volume. Manjira lives in Calcutta and has been a student of comparative literature. She's been a journalist for close to 3 decades. I'm in Delhi, and the producer of this podcast, Parvez Alam, is in London. Manjira is in Kolkata. So truly, we have an international podcast. Welcome, Manjira, to My Book.
Thanks, Malvika. Hello, listeners. And I thank Cineink for having me.
Manjira, No Return Address is an intriguing title. This is a story also in your book. What did you want to say with this title?
I chose the title No Return Address as a kind of a certain ring of finality to it. We all have a return address, and sometimes when we shift homes, we leave a forwarded address, But no return address is something which is quite final. I mean, nobody knows where the people of that, place went. So it was kind of very symbolic of being totally uprooted. So that was my intention. And then the story I had written, that also has this title because it was about an uncle in a family who never settled down, So for him also, it was like kind of a no return address. But No Return Address, the collection, as you have seen, it's not just about partition stories, it's about, displacement. So when you have a kind of a displacement in your mind also, there's a place you do not return to. Like say, even in say a love affair, when you break up, there's no going back. You may have memories, but you have nothing to go back to.
Manjira, I understand Bengal was a large province in India under the British rule. Parts of Bengal provinces are now in two countries, India and Bangladesh. Bengal has been divided several times. How far has this division shaped the identity and culture of the people of Bengal, especially regarding displacement?
See, Bengalis as a community, they are very proud of their language. So the language part held all Bengalis together. And but what happens, I was reading somewhere that history is written by victors and stories are written by survivors. So the survivors of this partition, they have their own stories, and there are lots and lots of stories, and it affected, it actually affected the economy of the land more, because the 1905, when that partition happened, I think it was Lord Curzon, and he was forced to again unite the two Bengals. The jute industry took a hit. The jute mills were on the West Bengal side, and the jute cultivation was mostly on the eastern side. So it all together, this economic battering of the state took more, more than some kind of the emotional separation and all that, because there was always traffic, between the two countries. But that economic thing, I think that Bengal never got over it, and with the British taking the capital out of Bengal to Delhi and all. So I think everything for us then, it hinged around a very big economic question.
Okay, so what I understand that Manjira, you're talking about not just partition and the displacement it caused, but several decisions which the rulers like the British took in breaking Bengal and the economic consequences of that division.
Right.
Most of us in India know about partition as a terrible, violent episode which has taken place. 2 million people died, more than 15 million people were uprooted. Manjira, indeed, this is an incredible work. I want to quote the historian Salil Mishra, who has worked on the partition phase for close to 3 decades. And he says in human history, the Indian partition was one of the largest displacements, one of the most violent migrations. Overnight, new borders were created, yet several people who suffered did not talk about it. Even my father, who came from Lahore, didn't want to talk about this phase of his life. Did you observe a similar silence in the people of Bengal? Was this a coping mechanism?
People coped in very different kind of ways, but what I'm trying to say is that we were not bothered about all this. And my mother belonged to West Bengal, so we had a certain kind of an objectivity. Now with my father, he lost his parents when he was young and all his siblings gone. I'm reflecting back and I'm seeing the difference. My mother's family had a lot of etiquette, but my father's family, they were a little bit of this restless. So sometimes you try to forgive them, and you see where it's all coming from. And then when I talk to my friends or not similar, and then I feel that there is literature in Bengali, maybe some of it is also translated, but we are trying to again piece something together, this generation, that the post partition generation. And that is why my stories, all of them are not partition, like people are fleeing and then there's violence happening to them, and things like that. So the stories actually branch out, and some say they're not at all to do with partition, but it is to do with displacement, whether it is in your mind or it is happening in society or in your own community. So that was the idea. And as an editor, I had some restrictions. I couldn't go to everybody asking for stories, and I had to make do with what I had. So I divided the book into just partition, then alienation, then I think belonging, and lastly a story which goes to show that displacement in a very big way, it can happen to any of us anytime. So parallels of that displacement show up in these stories.
Yeah, I think Manjira, what you've said is also there in the book. One of the contributors in the book, Soumitra Das, write in the collection, and he says that the stories are not so much about partition, but its effect on post-Tagorean society. He writes, the search for a home and rootedness takes precedence over other aspirations, such as the pursuit of wealth. Manjira, you have grown up in Calcutta. What are your observations about this post Tagorian society?
For Bengalis at one time, early 20th century, we had a lot of stalwarts, and Tagore was one of them. And he kind of embodied a kind of, a lifestyle, in many ways, which the sort of elite and the middle class in Bengal, West Bengal, and also his influence had reached East Bengal also. There was a very genteel kind of a lifestyle, but once this partition happened, and in fact, I was once talking to Shomitra, and he said, he was talking about, he's from Bombay, like he grew up in Bombay, and he said, I've never found the city, I found the city so dirty. So you cannot blame everything on partition, no, but the impact it had on the infrastructure, people coming from the east, and also sometimes the hinterland, for looking for job and opportunities, it did have an impact on the village, the city. The resources were absolutely stretched. So when the people came from East Bengal, they were given land, far flung. Some of them, took land by force. And even in Shoikat Majumdar's one excerpt on the Firebird, where he's talking about the party, we know which party it is. They had become like the moral keepers. They were sort of, they found a lot of support among the displaced people, but they also became like a moral, keepers, a conscience keeper, that, if women were going out to act and all, they did not like that in the para. So, I think he mentions that, before partition, the genteel life and the people who went to the theater, you had more time for leisure. But after that, it became such a bid for survival. No? The economic pie kept on shrinking. And unlike the north, in Punjab and all, they flourished. But here, I think, that is what I find, that the scars of partition are still there, and those who have left the city, maybe they do not want to talk about it much, and they said, forgive and forget and move on. And there's no question of not forgiving, and forgetting. Yeah, we should just write about this thing as a kind continuing writing about issues, which affect us as people, our identity.
Yeah, Manjira, that's a very nice way to approach a very difficult and terrible phase of history, to keep writing and, in a way, going through that healing process. In fact, there has been a regeneration of interest in the partition, and there is this partition project where experts from South Asia, historians, experts from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India are revisiting this part of history, and they are also re examining material. This book can also contribute in helping people understand this terrible phase and how it impacts, I would say, legacy of partition.
Yeah, I think they have already included this book, in the list of books in this partition archives, And I don't know about the one in Amritsar. And another funny thing happened is this the book germinated when I went to Amritsar 2 years back, and I went to the Partition Museum and see how amnesic sick we were about this whole thing, because I saw the notices in Punjabi, English, Urdu, and I think Hindi and Bengali. And I was wondering, why on earth do they have these notices inside Partition Museum in Bengali? And then I realized, of course, the Partition Museum, and the part on the eastern side was not very elaborate, but then that is, we have ourselves to blame. They were asking for things to be contributed, donated, more stories to be, just archived, for future. So that, the basic thing is that these kind of things should never happen again. And I do not want to see, there are two ways of looking at it. The politics is there, the political, and then there's the human side, So I don't want to get into the politics, though being, we are all political in some ways. I don't want to tread on any political toes. But I think in South Asia, in spite of linguistic differences and religion, we are very much the same. We do have a very feudal system, caste hierarchy, this, that, So I think this kind of thing shouldn't happen. There should be easy traffic between these countries. There should be more cooperation, and we should not let politics divide us, because the ultimate result then just results in bloodshed and disharmony. I mean, what do we get out of it?
You're listening to my book. I'm Malvika Kaul from New Delhi. Welcome back to my conversation with Manjira Majumdar. I'm discussing with Manjira the book she has compiled and edited, No Return Address, Partition and the Stories of Displacement. This book is published by Vitasta Publishers in New Delhi and is available on Amazon and other outlets. Manjira, you have divided the book into 4 sections: displacement, alienation, belonging, and the last one is revolution.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you identified stories for each section. And what an interesting list of authors you have. There is Aniket Majumdar, who lives in the US and is actually a market researcher. There is Anjana Basu from Calcutta, who's a seasoned novelist and travel writer. Debjani Sengupta, who teaches English at the University of Delhi. Debyantu Palit, a well-known Bengali poet and novelist and recipient of one of the prestigious literary awards, the Sahitya Akademi. Monideepa Sahu, a former banker and world traveller. Rimi Chatterjee, an academic based in Kolkata. Saikat Majumdar, who teaches creative writing in Ashoka University. Soma Chatterjee, a film scholar. And Soumitra Das, a journalist who also writes fiction. You have one of your stories also in this collection.
I would talk about Soma Chatterjee, who's a film scholar's story. She brought in a different angle, like you said, 3 times the province was divided. And when she writes about 1971, now when I was in school then, we learned about Bangladesh being formed, and that was the time where a lot of people again came in to West Bengal. And Shoma Chatterjee's story is about a young woman whose parents came, and in 1947 the government of India made arrangements for a paper, like it was nothing illegal about it. But in 71, a lot of them didn't have papers, And of course, it was said that the government gave them the voters card or, the ration card to just be part of the electorate and all. But, her story is about this girl. Her parents were like refugees, and she was also moving from place to place. And she felt that she wished she was a tree. She wanted to grow roots, So then again, there is a little bit of that thing about wanting to grow roots. Then there is this Pishi's room, Monideepa Shah. She writes about an aunt who was also had come away as a young bride, and she was part of a very aristocratic family, but her status had reduced to being just nobody in that house. When she became old, so she made her little space under the bed. That's where she stayed, and she had a pickle jar and everything over there. Then my story is about an uncle who becomes a vagabond, just getting away from there. And in fact, this is my tribute to the guru of partition literature, whom I consider Sadat Hasan Manto, because he looks into the human angle, very much. He set the benchmark, and so this uncle, was someone like, Toba Tek Singh, who didn't know what was what, for him, every place was the same or different, so that's very symbolic. We make these man-made divisions. So for him, his home was home, but then apart from that, he was very restless and he never grew roots and all. So that's very symbolic also of a state of mind. So similarly, another story, the Bendu Palit is a very well-known Bengali writer. His story is about, there was this exchange of property. So this Alam's father, exchanged this property with the girl he loves, Raka, her father. But when he comes back to his house in, say, in central Calcutta, he feels like a stranger, in his, which used to be his house once. He finds that, the tree that his father had planted, Kathali Chapa, that has been cut down. So these are the little things, which make him realize that, suddenly things have changed, it was not only a physical distancing, but also the mind, the mind had also kind of changed, or it had closed or whatever. So do you want me to read a little portion where,
Yes, please.
So he's talking to his father's friend, who is an old man now. So he says that the father, the Meshomoshai, the uncle asks him that what have you come for? So he said it's a kind of cultural exchange. Alam began discussing issues so that the people of the two countries can come closer, get to know each other, India and Bangladesh. Maybe that will happen. Ananta Shekhar paused and said almost to himself, but water and oil can never mix, can they? If they did, then your father would never have left Calcutta and I would have stayed in Dhaka. Ananta Shekhar spoke as if he knew exactly what to say to any question that might be put to him. Even in the midst of all his anguish, Alam wanted to laugh as he waited to see if Ananta Shekhar had anything more to say. He then replied, Meshomasha, we talk of the issue as that of oil and of water, because for years we have been taught to speak and think like that. But do we know which is the water and which the oil? Perhaps we'll find both are water or both oil.
It was great. I also want to talk about authors like Monadeepa Sahu, who has written a wonderful story about nostalgic story about Pishi's room. And there is Reemi B. Chatterjee, her story about time, Jessica, about several challenges faced in the city of Calcutta by people who have been displaced.
Jessica's story, she is an Anglo-Indian. So what happened with independence? The Anglo-Indians also felt that they were not going to be totally at home with the English, the British gone, because they were patronized. They did certain kind of jobs, And but then, I have put that section under belonging, because she realizes, that to belong to a place, when you're a happier person, and so and like you say, what this book will achieve, there will be a lot of other stories which will come, because it is not just about this issue about Muslims and Hindus only. Like I heard in Rajshahi, where my father came from originally, North Bengal, which is in Bangladesh now. There was a sizable Jewish community. So, they were also undecided which side they would go and work, And so this Jessica, she feels that, they all, like Anglo-Indians, felt they would be going back to England. And Jessica feels that she'll go back to Portugal because she has some Portuguese blood in her. But then she realizes that, she sees her own community person getting married to a Bengali girl. And then she feels that, no, I mean, this is what should happen. There should be an intermingling, and there should be, this holding on to an identity, for the sake of it is also futile. So the displacement can bring in understanding, exposure. Like Aniket Majumdar's story, he is a son of a refugee, but he has chosen to stay in the United States, maybe chosen, or circumstances when you go to study, you kind of stay back. And he creates his little little home, within within Phoenix, growing Rajnigandha. So that reminds him of home. So sometimes, we create also, we get displaced and we create a little home wherever we are. And that is the final reality. None of us, stay like nomads after all.
That's very true that we create a home wherever we are. Two stories have got my attention. One short story is The Hunter, and of course, the long story called Revolution. Tell me about these two stories because they stand out from your collection. They are very different, both in their narrative and also the goals that the storyteller may have.
Okay. See, I was trying to also include some new writings, because I felt that, we need to also showcase some writers. And Shoumitro is an unpublished writer, but he's a brilliant writer. And what I felt in Hunter is, sometimes when you're displaced, it's like an allegory, your environment can change you. So this Hunter suddenly becomes like a werewolf. He's hunting wolves, but the way it pans out, he becomes the vicious a werewolf kind of a person in the end. So sometimes displacement can have that kind of an effect also. And the revolution was again displacement, which can the threat, it's not always political, it can also come from immediately, like we are not actually putting much attention to this issue of climate change, climate refugee. So in your own home you can become like this family, peasant family comes in, and because the guy has the same name as the owner of the flat, he's very wily also, and he slowly takes over. And the person who's in the flat also has a very compassionate nature. So what do we do then, when somebody comes and takes over your home? It's a very dystopian kind of a thought, but it can happen. And then that way also many homes were also occupied during partition. A lot of people felt that when they went back, something could be done. They found that the property taken over, or just going waste. So these are like symbolic of a certain displacement. So sometimes there's no point in thinking about what happened 75 years, and get on with things which may matter now within the ambit of displacement.
Thank you, Manjira, for sharing unknown and not so discussed aspects of Bengal and Bengali society. This book will surely put a spotlight on the rather invisible and neglected aspect of Bengal's history and culture.
Thanks, Malvika.
No Return Address, Partition and the Stories of Displacement has been published by Vitasta Publishers in New Delhi and is available on Amazon and other outlets. In our next episode of my book, you are going to meet another author along with a book because, as you know, this is a podcast about books and their authors. This podcast has been produced by Parvez Alam and Achla Sharma for Cineink. To listen to other episodes of my book show, you can visit the Cineink website www.cineink.com. Cineink podcasts are also available on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast and YouTube. I'm Malvika Kaul signing off. Goodbye.